Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Roadhouse. So, one interesting thing to kind of get out of the gate here, it seems that at some point Patrick Swayze had a real bad knee. And so Patrick Swayze was to go on and decide to not do both Predator 2 and Tango and Cash, to go on and do Ghost, which actually Ghost was a successful film, and like it wasn't as strenuous to go on and do those other films. And so like luckily I guess Patrick Swayze just kind of uh like there was a blessing in disguise for him to go on and do Ghost, and it to do surprisingly very well compared to the other two movies that I just named. I just kind of found that to be interesting. So yeah, like Roadhouse really wasn't this like huge successful movie, but afterwards, after the movie was to come out, it seems like this movie really got to be a cult classic, a cult following, so much so that it eventually had like a made for TV movie kind of sequel to it. But yeah, so going on, I want to be honest. I probably only remember watching Roadhouse from watching it on TV. So now actually going on and watching the legitimate version of this movie, I'm like, wow, there's a whole bunch of like scenes of which that I could have never really have seen before because of either cuss words or a woman without clothes on or whichever. And this movie is actually very like interesting now that I've finally gone on and seen like an unedited version of it because I'm so used to just watching it on TV. So yeah, like, so this movie was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. Still to this day, this movie holds up. It's just so much fun. It's such a great movie. We are really to have this movie have like guys like Sam Elliott say that like he gets recognized by this movie more than any other. And I guess during this film, Patrick Swayze was to go on and oftentimes get mobbed by women while trying to do this film, to where he had to get like a bodyguard while doing this movie. Which is kind of funny because he basically is going being the bodyguard of this film to just turn around and need one for this film because he would just get like mobbed by women all the time. Even so much so, there was one scene where I guess there was to be some woman who was to go on and be concentrating so much on Patrick Swayze that she accidentally like knocked over something when she was to go on and do a scene in this film. So yeah, like a lot, like there's like a lot of interesting trivia about this movie. Supposedly the reason why Dalton was to be called Dalton in this film was because Dalton, Georgia. And really, I guess Dalton's first name on his medical records is actually James, but they always just call him Dalton anyways. And Sam Elliott, who is to call uh, Patrick Swayze's character Mijo, is just to be like a Spanish word for son. So that's a lot of interesting things here. But so when I go on to this, like it's easy for me to just go on to like Roadhouse. Like, has anybody not heard of this? Especially when going on like Family Guy in its later seasons was to do the joke about Roadhouse. And like everybody then who hadn't heard of this movie was to go on and find it, and that was really cool. I enjoyed this movie. Really, we go on and have this kind of old Wild West kind of theme of a film. And so, teeing it up, what is this movie about? Where can you say that you can go on and conveniently see this movie right now at the sickness recording? Well, seeing it right now, it's easily available on YouTube for absolutely free. So why do I really need to go on and say like, oh, you can also go on and watch this movie, blah blah blah. You can go right on to YouTube and watch it right there. I don't know what kind of version that you're going to be watching this movie in, um, but more than likely, if going on if eventually this is no longer on YouTube, then eventually you can go into any of the other reviews that I've done through the time of which that I've been here, and you can come to find a number of apps that I would recommend people going on and watching and eventually watch this movie for absolutely free. But like right now, it's available on YouTube, so why would I recommend anything else for absolutely free? So, with that said, Roadhouse. Teeing it up, what is this movie about? So it seems that we have Dalton who goes from bar to bar, town to town, and he is to be the best cooler in the world. He is to be the best kind of bouncer in the world. And this guy is to be like the professional bouncer that is to turn a rundown bar into a heavily successful establishment. And we, of course, have Patrick Swayze, who is to go on and have a certain set of rules. Never underestimate your opponent, expect the unexpected, take it outside, never start anything inside the bar unless it's absolutely necessary, and be nice. So we have Dalton that goes on and is to go into this bar and immediately find that there are problem people within this bar, and so he starts firing them. Even Terry Funk, the wrestler. And so we go into this story, and the more and more we have Dalton who's finding out where the problem of this town, not only this bar, we have just Dalton who has to turn around and has to save this town from a threat called Brad Wesley. Wesley! So yeah, like it just becomes this weird, like, okay, well, since the bar is running smoothly, now like Dalton has to go on and save the town. And I'm just like, man, the weird like escalation of this film, and I was just so like I was so intrigued by this movie. And so and oddly also we have Dalton who conveniently is to live like right across from Wesley's home, because Dalton was to decide to go and rent out this bar from Emmett, which is a really fun kind of barn guy. And so we also have Sam Elliott in this film. We have a cluster of just interesting actors and actresses in this movie. Um, yeah, so let's go on into that double five time territory. You've probably heard this story. If you haven't, I just remember. I think, God, I want to try to say this correctly. I just remember, like, I rarely ever remember the monster truck moment in this movie, but I remember. I think it was like TNT would do these commercials where it'd be like the action-packed movie of that week or whatever of that whatever. And so they would always have this like monster truck like bashing through this window, and then Jaws would attack somebody, and then there would kind of show like generic like action sequences and whatever. And I was always just like, where the heck is that like monster truck coming from? Like, what movie is that from? And then I just realized today, it's like, oh yeah, this is from Roadhouse. Like, I remember there was some weird action sequence, I think on TNT, where like you'd have this monster truck bashing through this glass, and I never understood what like movie that was from until now. And I was like, oh, okay, so that's where that was from. Um, I don't remember if it was TNT, but like it was something like that, where there was a bunch of sequences. So historians or people that just know more than I do, let me know exactly where that thing is from. But anyways, with that said, let's go on into that double five time territory because about that time yet again to just go into what is to be called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we can spoil this movie. So, very beginning of the film, we of course have a guy named Tillman who is decided to want to finally fix up his bar called the Double Deuce. And so Sam Elliott, when he ends up going into the bar, he calls it the double douche. He's like, the double douche. Instead of the double deuce. Anyways, pushing on. So, Tillman is to make his way to this bar called the Bandstand, and Dalton is to be this cooler there. And it seems that this bar, for the most point, is to be running smoothly, even though Dalton is to, of course, get stabbed at this establishment, and he is going into the back to sew himself up. So, Tillman is to go on, and we have Tillman offering Dalton, like, hey man, like, I want you as my cooler. I want you to fix my bar up. And Dalton's like, well, like, Wade Garrett's a lot better. And Tillman is like, well, like, he's older. You're not. So I want you. So we have Dalton that tells, of course, Tillman, it's like, well, hey, like, $5,000 now, and like you're paying for medical expenses and all kinds of stuff. And Tillman's like, you're on. So we have, of course, Dalton, who is supposed to get a airplane ticket, and Dalton's like, no, I don't fly. Like, it's dangerous. And Tillman's like, well, when should I be expecting you then? And Dalton's like, you'll be expecting me, but it'll be when it's unexpected. So that way Dalton can kind of come in and kind of see everybody working and just kind of feel everyone out. So Tillman is to make his way back to his bar, and so Dalton is to go on and toss this keys to this homeless man. This homeless man is like, hey, do I look like a valet? And Dalton's like, hey, the car's yours. And he's like, what? Because Dalton is to now go on and take his BMW out of this tarp to go on and drive his way to, of course, where Tillman now is. So, and his bar is, his location. So, Dalton goes on to make it to the Double Deuce, and he is to also go on and rent this place from Emmett, and we of course have Emmett, who's just kind of confused by Dalton wanting the place to rent out, because he's like, well, hey, wait a minute, like, nobody wants to rent this place. Like, there's no television, there's no, like, there's not much of any, like, things that anybody would, like, there's nothing here. Like, you have nothing, but Dalton's like, yeah, so, so he's like, all right, like, would you mind, like, $100 a month? It's like, yeah, that sounds like a reasonable thing. So Dalton goes on and is to make it to the Double Deuce, and he's already seeing a number of people that he's like, fired. So we have a guy like Morgan, this big, massive man who is to be Terry Funk. God, that man, like, such a big guy, and like, it's so fascinating to kind of see, like, Terry Funk's, like, wrestling career, and just kind of see like the transformation that this guy has gone through um, in movies, but also in wrestling. So, because he's gone on and done all kinds of crazy matches and everything like that, and done movies. So Morgan, of course, is to be this kind of big behemoth man who is to not take crap from anybody. And so Morgan goes on and is to just start decking people, like if anybody looks at him funny. And so we have Dalton probably in his brain who's like, dude, like this guy like just doesn't like this guy has to have a cooler head, and I don't think he's gonna ever gonna have that. So we go on as Dalton is to sit in the buddy corner, which I guess is Patrick Swayze's nickname. I guess is Buddy. So we go on and we have Morgan who's pointing a finger at Dalton, telling him like, "Hey, if you don't drink, you're out of here." And so we have Dalton who is to get a coffee black, and certain people are starting to ask for Dalton's name because they're like, "Hey, who are you, buddy?" So all of a sudden, we have Cody and his band kind of doing their set, and so we of course go on and we have Dalton who is wanting to surprise Cody and telling everybody like, "Hey, don't tell any, don't say that it's me, so I can go on and I can surprise Cody." So Dalton after is Dalton after hearing the band is to go on and is to surprise Cody and be like, "Hey," like, and so Cody immediately knows it's Dalton, and so Cody is to mention how like this place tends to have like blood smeared in certain places fairly often. So we go on, and so Dalton, after everything is to kind of be set up, we have Tillman who's seeing like Dalton. He's like, like yeah, like like come on. So we go on, and so Dalton is to kind of set up for everybody, uh, like who he thinks is to go on and stay, and who is to go after their first kind of their his first kind of seeing of everything. So Dalton is to tell Tillman that he is like running the show. So yeah, like whatever he says goes. It's his way or the highway. So after this first night, we go on and we of course fire Morgan because he doesn't have the right temper. We also have, I think they end up firing also a girl named Judy, who I think was a waitress that was going on and selling much more so than beer at this bar, so they let her go. So we go on into this film, and Patrick or Dalton, after this night is over, like the very like following night, we start to see that Dalton, once he starts to take charge of this bar, is to realize that we have guys like Pat McGurn, who is kind of taking from the till. So Dalton is to spot this, and so we of course have Dalton, who is to fire Pat because he's skimming, and so Dalton is to mention that that's going to be that guy's severance, and for him to just get the heck out of here. So we of course go on and we have Dalton within a night is to find there are a number of people that show up at this bar and are to do these very like odd like things. So we go on and have at one point where one guy is to offer up his wife for $20 for guys to go on and kiss her chest. And instead, we have these two guys that decide to go on and comp a feel. And then they're like, well, hey, come on, guys, why don't you kiss him? Why don't you? And they're like, no, like, we don't even have $20, so we might as well just kind of cop a feel and take advantage of this moment. Which all of a sudden leads to this fight, which really just leads to, of course, them having to take it outside. And we also had, like, the very first, like, knife moment that we had with Patrick, or we had with Dalton. Dalton goes on and is to have this guy whip this knife out and say, like, hey, man, I can take you, Dalton. I think I'm better than you. And then he's like, oh, okay, well, let's take this outside. And then the guys go outside, and then Dalton doesn't fight them. He just walks off. I'm like, what the fuck? So, but yeah, but we also have, like, another moment where we go on and we have a woman who is to dance on top of this table, and Dalton is telling Hank, it's like, go after that. So Hank is to try nicely to get this woman off this table, like, hey, man, you should probably bring her down. And so going on, we have, of course, this guy who I think his name is Loudmouth in the credits. We have this guy who whips out this blade and is like, hey, man. And so all of a sudden Dalton is to take this guy's head, slam him on the table, and then is to have him be, like, hauled out of this bar, and is to grab the woman and to have her come down. So Dalton does not mess around. Like, yeah, everybody, it's Dalton. So we also have consistently, like, Denise, who we will see later on in the film, to strip down to bare nothing, is to consistently come to this bar every single night, it seems, much more being very interested in Dalton and wanting to eventually sleep with him, but Dalton has no real interest. So we have at one point where, of course, Dalton is to go on and fight people, and he ends up getting cut open, so much so that he can't just sew it back shut, that he has to go on and meet with Dr. Elizabeth Clay, who I believe in IMDb is just called Doc. So Dalton goes off to see this woman to have her staple his chest, and she's like, well, I'm gonna give you a local anesthetic, and, like, which is just kind of a numbing agent or whatever. And Dalton's like, no, I'm fine. And she's like, really? This is gonna hurt? And he's like, no, I'm fine. So they go on, and so she staples him, and she's kind of just really interested by this guy. And so come to find out, as Dalton was to go on and get this other kind of beat up car, and instead of driving his BMW to the Double Deuce, he goes on and gets this beat up car, and every single night there is always some kind of, there's like a brick that went through his windshield, there's like a stop sign that goes through his passenger window, and so on and so forth. And so we just continue to go on and have Dalton, who's going to Red's, who goes off to Red's auto shop, or yeah, Red's auto parts, my bad, and is to order this windshield. And Red is like, well, hey, man, with how beat up this car is, you might as well just replace the thing. And Dalton's like, no, I really like that car, so I'll pay whatever I need to. Because, like, he knows, like, the car, whatever car he's going to buy is just going to get beaten up anyways. Dalton was to also buy a number of spare tires, like at the cheapest price he can find because he knew that his tires were going to get slashed. So this guy is like really like thinking ahead of all the scenarios that is probably going to happen with his car. And so luckily nobody like blows up his car or does anything like that. Then he has no car to eventually have. So, but come to find out when after Dalton is to go on and see this doctor, come to find out Red is actually to be a relative of this doctor. And so it's like, oh, that's interesting. Because Dalton is to see this picture of this woman in Red's auto parts. So it's like, oh, hey, wow, like, how interesting is that? So we go on, and so Dalton is to live like at Emmett's place, and we have Dalton at a certain point in time. As you see from across the pond, we have Brad Wesley, who is having all of these people over to this big massive pool party, where we of course have Brad Wesley that is just so in awe of the one guy that of course is to be called Mountain, especially after we have a guy like O'Connor, who has gone on to fail him. Then Brad Wesley is to hire a guy like Mountain to go on and be added to his men, so they can go on and be a much more intimidating force, as well as them hiring Morgan, uh, after, of course, Morgan had been fired. So we go on into this story, and so Pat, who is now upset with him getting fired, is to go on and talk to, of course, Wesley. And so Wesley is to go on and speak with, or Wesley's men is to go on and speak with Tillman and convince Tillman to reinstate Pat and to fire Dalton. Like, yeah, man, like, you're the one that's fired. And so we go on here and we just have Dalton, who ends up fighting along with a number of these bouncers to get rid of all these men. And eventually Tillman is to start running out of beer, and Dalton is to say, like, hey, man, like, I've taken care of it. Like, because I'm sure Dalton knows distributors. Like, I'm sure Dalton knows who to call. And so Dalton is to go on and make a phone call to eventually have, like, alcohol get distributed. And when they finally do, there's a guy that is to be delivering this truck full of beer. And he has this, like, dolly and all these, like, beer, like, these beer boxes. And all of a sudden we have Terry Funk, we have Morgan, and we have Mountain, and we have all these guys who come on in to try to stop this bar from getting this beer. But we'll get to that in a second here. So we start to see that people in this town are to have problems. That all of a sudden we start to realize that when Dalton one day, when he is to go in for parts for his car, is to realize that Red is getting held up for money at some points. And it seems that Dalton is to go to Red and ask, like, hey, how much money are they taking from you? And he's like, well, 10%. So it's like, okay, so this guy is basically like forcing everybody to give him a certain kind of like tax, and that's just wrong. So even to the point where they go on and they are to like go through and tear down the products of certain things of Red's to go on and convince him to give them money. So Dalton is to realize that this is so much bigger than what he originally thought. And we also, the one thing that I almost forgot about, we had the one scene where Carrie was bringing Dalton breakfast, and Dalton was to give up or get up from bed, and he has absolutely no clothes on. And Carrie's like, "Whoa!" So she goes on and she gives him breakfast, and so they're talking together, and I thought that that scene was like so interesting. Um, so we also so pushing on though. I just wanted to quickly mention that, reference that. So we go into this story, and after it seems that people are having a ton of problems with Wesley, we then go on and have, of course, a Dalton calling Wade Garrett, and Wade Garrett, of course, is working at this strip joint, this joint where it seems there was a guy who was a kind of be a little bit grabby on some of the women there, and so Wade is to grab this military guy and be like, "Hey Rambo," or how like I should do it in a much deeper voice. "Hey Rambo, you should you should go on and save the world from your seat there, buddy," like or something like that. So all of a sudden we have the woman that's very appreciative of Wade, kind of grabbing this guy away from her. So Wade goes and answers this phone call, and it's Dalton. And so they start talking, and we, of course, have Wade calling Dalton Miho. So the big part of this conversation, besides them like catching up, is Dalton is to ask Wade while he's going on doing laundry if he's ever heard uh, of course, Brad Wesley. And Wade is like, "No, like, is he giving you problems?" And he's like, "I don't know. It's just like same town, different problems." It's like, "Yeah, I get you." So we have it to where Wade is just kind of like, you know what, like, I don't know. I think that at some point Dalton's gonna need help. Like, I don't know. I just have this like spider sense. So Wade goes on to make it to where the double deuce is, and we have Sam Elliott that calls the double deuce the double douche. He's like, "Ugh." So Wade is to conveniently make his way to this bar as Dalton is to be outnumbered, and so Wade is to make it back in the back and is to say, "Hey, Miho, you having problems?" So Wade goes on and evens out the numbers between Dalton and Wade, going on and taking a number of these guys out. And so we go on, and then they have this like distributor. So everything seems to be coming up Millhouse. It seems for this movie. It seems that this bar has gone on to uh, be able to bounce back from getting its distribution and everything like that from this vendor. So Dalton is to go on and start to realize there is still problems within this town. So much so that it seems that Red's Auto Parts is to be on fire. This Ford dealership is to have a monster truck being ran through it. And then Garrett's farm is to be like caught on fire and explodes. Luckily, of course, we have it where Dalton is to get Emmett out in time. So we go on into this story, and we also have Brad Wade, who it seems that he's losing, like, after the whole, uh, like, the bar getting, like, a distributor. Wade is to go on into this bar and is to have Denise dance. And so, since she, of course, is to be a woman that should not be dancing in a bar like this because it's not a strip joint, Dalton is to try to get this woman down, but it seems that we, of course, have a moment in this movie where now Jimmy is to step up and want to take down a number of these bouncers, and so Dalton is to tell his bouncers go on and try to take them down. So we have Wade kind of jumping and trying to take down Jimmy, and so Wade fails, and then Dalton comes in, and then Brad fires this gun and just like, okay, like, we're done here. So we immediately have it to where everybody's like, ooh, like, Dalton, like, you made Brad scared. That's why he shot that gun. And he's like, I don't think Brad's scared of anything. So we have Dalton going on, and because I want to get a lot of this, like, there's a lot of story going on in this movie, so it's not going to be the perfect thing. I'm just going to kind of come around and do certain things. So we have Dalton, who is to mention to Dr. Elizabeth, or I'll just call her Elizabeth for the rest of this film. We have Dalton, who's to tell Elizabeth, like, hey, if you ever want a thing of coffee, you can come by my bar, and, like, I'll be willing to treat you if you'd like. So Elizabeth goes on to this bar to meet with Dalton, and so, because she easily takes a liking to him. So Dalton is to go on with Elizabeth, and the first date they end up kissing, and the second date they go on, and Dalton is to show Elizabeth to his place that he lives at, and they sleep with one another. And so all of a sudden we have Elizabeth at some point of this movie who is to not only see that Brad Wesley may be a dangerous man, but she's also to see Dalton as a dangerous man, which is kind of interesting. The further and further we go into this movie, more Elizabeth is thinking, like, well, who's going to save this town from you? And that's when, like, the background of the thing explodes, and that's when, like, Emmett's place is now on fire, and Dalton is having to save Emmett and, like, ask if he's okay, and he's like, I would be okay if you're not on top of me. So we go on into this movie, and so now Elizabeth is spending time with Dalton and with Wade to the point where, like, they stay up all night just kind of dancing to All My Exes Live in Texas. And so Wade is dancing along with Elizabeth, and so she's to mention, it's like, well, hey guys, like, I'm gonna go on and leave here because I have a shift in a couple hours, so yeah, I'm just gonna get out of here so she can sleep. Because Wade is to mention he'll sleep when he's dead, foreshadowing what might actually happen in this movie. So when Emmett's place is to be set on fire, we all of a sudden have Jimmy, who is driving away on this motorcycle, and so Dalton is to kind of grab him off this motorcycle and is to go on and have this fight out. So we have these, like, wild lines that are delivered here, where Jimmy is to mention that he effed guys like Dalton in prison. And so And so we go on and we have these like moments where like also Dalton is telling Jimmy to go and F himself. And I'm just like, man, this scene is so interesting. Like when you have it uncensored from off of TV. Because I'm like, good God, I don't know how many times I've probably seen Roadhouse on TV. And it's just kind of so interesting seeing all this, like, all of this uncensored, like, man, is Roadhouse just way better with a unedited version. Oh my God, is it so different. So we have Dalton fighting Jimmy to the point of where Dalton is to go into a point where he kills Dalton by just kind of like almost simulating ripping his heart out. So Dalton is to kill Jimmy, and then Dalton drags Jimmy into this little pond or this lake or whatever, and he's like, Wesley, Wesley, to where Brad realizes that this isn't going to stop, that it's just going to keep going on and on and on. So we then have it where Dalton is to get a call from Brad, Wesley, and so Wesley is to tell Dalton that it's like, well, hey, like you have to either choose between Dr. Elizabeth or you have to choose Wade. Which one do you want to live? And Dalton's like, huh? And so Wesley's like, yeah, I'll just coin flip it and we'll figure it out. So we have it where Dalton is to go to the Double Deuce and Wade shows up there. And so Dalton is to kind of look very disheveled, but or Wade is to look very disheveled, and so Dalton's like, well, hey man, like I think it's finally just time for us to get out of here. Like you know what, Wesley is one. Like we'll give it to him. So Dalton goes back to meet up with Dr. Elizabeth or Dr. Clay and tell her it's like, you know what, like you need to just leave and get out of here. And she's like, no, like I wouldn't do that either. Like, you know how hard it is to find a job. So Dalton goes on, and I think the trust between Elizabeth and Dalton has just been really shaken in this movie, to where like Elizabeth no longer wants to go on and like go with Dalton anywhere. So we also had the scene between Wade and Dalton where Wade was talking about how in a town before, Dalton can't shake the fact that he had to kill somebody in self-defense because there was a guy with a gun, and Dalton is to not let go with that he was to kill a guy, and now he's to go back in the same scenario and possibly have to kill again, even though it might still be self-defense still. So Dalton, after talking to Elizabeth, goes back to speak with Wade to just be like, hey man, like let's get out of here. And all of a sudden we realize that it was heads, or it was tails. And so Wade is to be stabbed with a knife with a note that says it was tails. So Dalton is to take this knife and is like, you know what, that you pushed too far, you pushed the wrong man. So Dalton goes on into his BMW and is to drive off, to where all of a sudden Wesley's men are all expecting, oh my God, he's coming for us! Pow, 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 pow. And so the BMW explodes and swings into falling on what. So they open this car and realize that there had just been this knife on this gas pedal, and so the one guy who had this knife is to go and take it and put it back into his holder and just kind of get ready for when Dalton's going to spring into action here. So all of a sudden, we have one guy who starts to go through and is to start to notice that one by one, all of these men are to go on and all just get decked by Dalton, either killed or to just be like knocked out. So this guy just starts strolling through, just and we go on and we have Dalton who is to come from behind this guy and is to take this knife and stab him into the chest. Like, well, I guess it's tails again. Then Dalton grabs the knife from this guy and is to chuck the knife, hitting Pat, killing him also. So we have Tinker here, or Tinker, weirdly. The guy with the kind of the cat's cap. He ends up going to this one room and he's like, I hate this house. And so all of a sudden we have this guy who goes on and he's in this room with all these like stuffed animals, and he ends up getting like this polar bear knocked and fallen over. A polar bear collapses on top of him. And so we have Dalton who tells Tinker here, like, hey, like, you guys are made for one another. So Dalton goes on, and Tinker didn't die. So Dalton goes on and is now after Wesley. And so we have Dalton that goes on, and like at first, like Dalton is to fight Wesley without a gun, and because Wesley is to just have these spears or these sticks that he's fighting Dalton with, and it was like really kind of cool in the beginning. But then all of a sudden, like, Wesley is to grab this gun, and then Dalton is to kind of kick it away. And so we then go on and have everybody in the town. We have Red. We have Emmett. We have Tillman. Red. If I didn't say that already, we had the car dealership guy who was Pete. They all come in with these shotguns and they're plowing away on Wesley, and he's like, plah, plah, plah. And we go on and we have Tillman who's like, this is our town. Pow! And Wesley falls into this table that has glass in it. We also had the one scene that I almost forgot about here, where Dalton was to have be at this bar, and Denise was throwing herself at Dalton, and then Jimmy is to grab Denise, and come to find out, when Dalton was to make his way to meet with Wesley, Dalton realized that Denise was to have a bruise on her eye. So, because Dalton at one point is to go on and meet with Wesley, and he is to try to have Denise music being shut off because it had no heart. And so Dalton is talking to Wesley, trying to figure out if there's like some common ground between the both of them. And so when they both talk to one another, it just feels like there's nothing that Dalton could really like do or say or whatever. But it seems that Dalton is to realize that Wesley can just buy anything. That it's like, well, hey, like, how about I buy that bar and then you run it, and like, and so on and so forth. And Dalton's like, no, like, I don't want that to happen at all. Because Wesley can just buy anything and just go on and just because he's to mention that he's like, well, hey, I'm gonna have like JCPenney come here. Yeah, JCPenney's no longer a company. And he's mentioning about like how many things that he brought to this town. And so like Dalton is just in his brain just thinking that, oh, so you think the town owes you something because you got all these things here, these unique items. And Wesley's like, well, yeah, like I'm the guy that is to be like the face of this town. So yeah, so we go on, and after they go and they shoot Wesley, all of a sudden all these cops are making their way into what of course is Wesley's home, and they're asking like, hey, like, who saw what happened here? And absolutely no one is going on and admitting that they saw anything. Even Tinker, who's like, I hate this house, and he's just like, I didn't see anything. A polar bear fell on me. So nobody's saying anything. So nobody's getting any charges pressed, and so really we just kind of go on, and we have to assume that Dalton either left this town or was to go on and just stay here forever. And because like eventually like, but even though like the town did like go on and like win itself back, like still maybe Dalton just decides to just stick around there, because a lot of the times we had Dalton who was to go on to the next bar and the next bar and the next, and like kind of assume that he's just going to keep on going to be this kind of like nomad, or this guy who just keeps floating from place to place. But anyways, speaking of place, I think it's my place to just go on and get out of here. So let me know if there's something that I forgot about within the spoilers of this movie. I think I covered everything, but there might be a lot of times where like, oh, this movie isn't exactly how it happened, because I don't do it that way. Because at the end of the day, I just saying the movie and talking about it. I don't think I graded this movie. Like, I would have to say this movie like is a movie that of course is so like iconic. It's hard to grade. Hence why I was kind of very hesitant to just like. It's definitely a positive review of this film. Especially now seeing it the uncensored variation, the non-TV variation of this film, so much better, way better. So if you're able to go on and rent or buy this movie, or if the YouTube version of this film is to be completely uncensored and is to not be a TV variation of this film, then you're seeing a great film. Yeah, this movie still holds up. It's a great film. It doesn't feel like it's like a movie that feels like a time period piece where it's like, oh, this just like, it still is a great movie. So I feel like I have to go on and say that this is a great film still. I still enjoy it. I still would recommend it for anybody and whatever. So great film, thumbs up, enjoyed it. And so yeah, I think that's all I want to say. At the end of the day, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.